In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro dives into the current political landscape as the nation approaches a pivotal election. With just days remaining, he discusses the implications of recent statements made by President Joe Biden, particularly his controversial remark labeling half of Donald Trump's supporters as garbage. This comment has sparked outrage and raised questions about the Democratic Party's approach to unity and division in the lead-up to the election. Shapiro begins by highlighting the tight race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, referencing polling data that shows a close contest in key battleground states. He notes that while Harris has seen a slight uptick in Michigan, Trump maintains leads in several other critical states. The political climate is charged, and Shapiro emphasizes that small shifts in voter sentiment could determine the election's outcome. The podcast shifts focus to Kamala Harris's recent rally at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C., where she attempted to galvanize support. Shapiro critiques her performance, describing her as an underwhelming candidate who has consistently failed to connect with voters. He points out that her campaign lacks a clear purpose and that her attempts to scare voters about Trump's past actions, particularly regarding January 6th, fall flat. Shapiro argues that Harris's reliance on fear tactics rather than substantive policy discussions reveals her weaknesses as a candidate. The discussion takes a significant turn when Shapiro addresses Biden's recent comments, where he implied that the only garbage he sees is among Trump's supporters. Shapiro argues that this statement is emblematic of the Democratic Party's divisive rhetoric, which has been a hallmark of Biden's presidency. He contrasts Biden's remarks with the party's previous claims of unity, suggesting that such comments only serve to alienate a significant portion of the electorate. Shapiro also critiques the media's response to Biden's statement, noting attempts to downplay its significance by suggesting he was only referring to a specific individual rather than Trump supporters as a whole. He emphasizes that the clarity of Biden's words leaves little room for misinterpretation, asserting that the president's comments reflect a broader disdain for those who oppose him politically. As the podcast progresses, Shapiro explores the broader implications of Biden's rhetoric for the Democratic Party. He argues that the party's strategy of labeling Trump supporters as enemies is counterproductive and risks further alienating voters. Shapiro points out that this approach has been a consistent theme in Democratic politics, dating back to Barack Obama's presidency, where divisive language became more prevalent. Shapiro also highlights the irony in the Democrats' calls for unity while simultaneously engaging in rhetoric that disparages a large segment of the population. He suggests that this contradiction could backfire, especially as voters reflect on their experiences under the current administration. In contrast to Harris and Biden, Shapiro presents Donald Trump's closing argument as straightforward and effective. Trump's message centers on the idea that voters have already witnessed his presidency and the positive outcomes associated with it, such as economic growth and stability. Shapiro argues that this simple yet powerful message resonates with voters who are dissatisfied with the current administration's performance. Shapiro emphasizes that Trump's approach is not about fear-mongering, but rather about reminding voters of the tangible benefits they experienced during his presidency. He believes this strategy could sway undecided voters who are looking for a reason to support Trump over Harris. Throughout the podcast, Shapiro critiques the media's handling of the election narrative, particularly their attempts to frame Trump as the divisive figure in the race. He argues that the media's portrayal of Trump as a threat to democracy contrasts sharply with the reality of Biden's comments and the Democratic Party's rhetoric. Shapiro asserts that the media's bias undermines their credibility and contributes to the polarization of the electorate. As the podcast concludes, Shapiro reflects on the upcoming election and the stakes involved. He reiterates that the Democratic Party's reliance on divisive language and fear tactics may ultimately hinder their chances of success. In contrast, he believes that Trump's straightforward message about his past presidency could resonate with voters looking for change. With the election just days away, Shapiro emphasizes the importance of understanding the implications of the candidates' messages and the broader political landscape.